Hello everyone, it's Dylan from Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, and welcome back to another Appreciating Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. This is the series where me and my friend Rarity Fangirl take a look back at each and every entry point into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise on the anime and manga side, and discuss what made those productions special, and just our personal thoughts on them. And in today's part, which is episode 7, crazy we're already at 7 episodes, we are going to be discussing all things Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0, or more officially known as the Yu-Gi-Oh! Toei anime that was made in 1998, and we are going to include the movie, the very short, it's hard to even call it a movie, but the very short film that was released in the early part of 1999. Now, this was totally before the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime aired, which was, of course, done by Studio Gallop. Gallop would go on to do the next 5 Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows, 6 in total. And this, if you've ever seen, like, Kaiba with green hair, or if you've heard about, like, Dark Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is what people are referring to. And we're going to be talking about it. Rarity Fangirl, going to bring you in real quick to introduce yourself. I'll link her channel down below. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Hello, friends. I'm excited to talk about Season 0, because Season 0, fun fact, was the first big way I actually contributed to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fandom. Not through my own content, but some of you might know that I was one of the beginning voice actors for the group Team Millennium, who fan dubs Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 in English of custom music and sound effects and whatnot. They are a lovely group of people. Their most recent product was actually dubbing the movie, which was really awesome. And quite a few of my fandom crew members, including Editor GT, who is the person who voices Yugioh for my projects, is a part of that group. They're a very lovely group. I just no longer work with them just due to the fact that I'm so busy, but I always wish them the best, and if they ever needed something, they could always come and get me. So it's kind of cool to come back and talk about Season 0, because that was my first contribution, even before I did the Arc 5 manga dubs, like maybe a year or two before. So it's just cool to talk about the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. Like, it's the OG. It's as OG as it gets.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And I think that talking about Season 0, you can talk about it in 2 different ways. You can talk about it as an adaptation of the manga, or you can talk about it as its own thing. I prefer to keep it as its own thing because I could go into a rant of how this is not an accurate adaptation of the manga, because it's not. There are some games moved around, there's new characters introduced, Kaiba's way more frequent as an antagonist, which, while I like, is not accurate. They took away my boy Mokuba's first game, and they took away his second game too. I could talk about that. I had to mention that because y'all know Mokuba's my boy. And they basically just took his first 2 games out and just has him show up in a car as his first appearance. And then he comes in formally for the Def T arc, which I think they adapted Def T actually very well. Even removing Tristan's baby little nephew, which was very kind of weird in the manga. They just didn't have that. And of course, the inclusion of Miho as a character was new. She was in 1 chapter of the manga with Honda, and then she didn't really do anything again. So I think Season 0 is a really interesting thing, and I prefer to talk about it as its own thing. Dylan, are you kind of in the same boat as opposed to talking about this as an adaptation of the manga? It's just kind of its own thing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it is. I know people might debate it, but it really, sure, like, it is an adaptation of the manga as well, but I think you do almost need to talk about it as its own thing, because if you read the manga and then immediately watch this season, it's totally different, and you'll see all of the differences, and I know people do refer to this as like dark and evil Yu-Gi-Oh! And sure, it definitely is more so than a lot of the shows in like the consistency and the punishment games and the fact that like there's not a lot of dueling, so there's other games that are like more sinister, like the game that Yugi plays with that woman where, every time he loses a piece, the door opens and a tiger is ready to like maul Anzu. Like, sure, if you want to talk about like the craziness of those games and the stakes that are on the line, then yes, it is darker, but like even Season 0 censored a lot of the things that happened to characters in the original manga. So to me, whenever anyone like talks about how dark Season 0 is, I always kind of question whether they read the manga or not, and not as like a slight or anything, but you know, when you do read the manga and the storylines that Season 0 adopts, whether it's the games or Death T or, you know, whatever, there are a lot of things that they changed. One of the more notably and lighthearted ones, and I mean, I'll start there as we're just kind of talking about the big differences, to me, is always going to be Miho. The fact that they took this character who was in like a single chapter, and I can't even remember if she had a line. Maybe she had one line in the manga, but she was like a massive, massive background character. I mean, to even call her a side character in the manga, I think does her justice. Like, she really was not present in the manga at all. And somebody just must have seen her and said, you know, she would be a great addition to the main cast. And I've read over the years the different, like, theories and reasonings as to why this is. One of the most popular and I guess agreed on theories is that it made the group more even in terms of guys and girls, giving Anzu, you know, another girl character in the group, and just kind of made it more even with Yugi, Joey, and Tristan, and then, you know, Anzu and Miho. And it makes sense, but it still changes a lot for the characters in the story. Not only is Miho such a big part of this series, where she wasn't present at all in the manga for all of these, you know, games and storylines, but you also have Tristan, who I think is totally different in Season 0 than in the manga. So even just starting there with the main group presentation that we get in Season 0, for a decision like that, it makes the characterization for some characters totally different in this season. So, you know, speaking back to your original point, I do kind of agree with you where when you look at Season 0, you do have to consider that it is a very loose adaptation at best of the manga, because there are massive, massive differences where Studio Gallup's adaptation, you know, if you remove the filler, is actually much more accurate, in my opinion, to the original manga.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's cool you brought up Honda, or Tristan, because I think a lot of people don't like him in Season 0. I kind of don't. I loved him in the manga, and I like his strong personality in the original story. I think that him being, like, I think it's like the member of the Beautification Club, I think that was a little, they just ran with that gag a little bit more. And of course, he had a crush on Miho and stuff. I just don't think that was as interesting. And I kind of liked in the manga, as much as his baby cousin was annoying, I kind of liked expanding upon, oh, he had a sister and he just being a good, you know, uncle to his nephew, you know, little things like that. It's like the same thing that the manga mentions Bakura has a sister that we never hear from, right?
Right.
And about censorship, I still cannot believe the way they tried to censor Gozaburo Kaiba's suicide, where he doesn't even fall out the building. He just faints on the floor and everyone's like, he's dead all of a sudden.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. No,
because like the wheelchair guy just comes in, is like, I'm gonna pay my respects to the president, but like he just fainted. Yeah, and that's interesting to really think about, like, for Kaiba. And of course, y'all know that as Kaiba Brothers fan, I have to talk about that analysis in these videos at least somewhere. That Kaiba, again, being a recurring character, he has these game masters, and I believe all of them are anime original, and so are the games for the most part. Like, Eileen Rao, she was the one with the tiger.
Yep.
Rajinhai, that is actually not a real game. I actually Googled it, because that's actually one of my favorite games that they added for the anime. I really like the concept of that game. I think it's cool. So it's actually anime original. As far as I know, it's not based on anything.
Interesting.
I mean, they said it was similar, I think, to Shoujo, which is, I think, a Japanese game. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, Kaiba is just more of a recurring character, and Gozaburo Kaiba's alive for most of this anime, which is really weird, because it just recontextualizes Kaiba as a character. The fact his father was alive, because in the manga, he dies 6 months before Death Tea, which is presumably around the beginning of the manga or slightly before it. So there's that characterization to consider, that Kaiba's just our recurring antagonist, which is really funny, because I believe one of the original ideas for Kaiba, when they figured out, okay, we're not going to make him a one-off, was this guy who was making all these games for Yugi and his friends, like the Game Master, right? And they kind of do that in this series, that original concept, one of the original ideas for Kaiba, as this person coming in and giving Yugi and Co. challenges, mostly Yugi, pretty much. But I think that was really, really cool. And I think another notable thing about Season 0 is the voice cast. It's completely different from Duel Monsters. There's not a single VA who comes back.
And that, Rarity, not to interrupt you, but that is actually something that when you watch season 0, there are certain characters, like Joey is one where you can say, and I remember when I was doing my watch along for season 0 not too long ago, a lot of people in my chat were saying and asking, wait, is this the same one from Studio Gallop? So some are very different, but some are similar. So I am happy that you brought that up, because there are no same voice actors between the two adaptations.
Yeah. Like, for example, Megumi Ogata, apologies if I pronounce any Japanese wrongs in any of these videos, she played Atem in Yugi, which that's novel enough for number one, that Yugi and Atem were played by a woman. Unlike in the original Japanese anime, they were both played by a guy. But she's also very well known for playing characters in Card Captor Sakura, and I think one of her most notable roles is Sailor Uranus in the original 90s dub of Sailor Moon. So it's really cool to have her and her take on Yugi and Atem, and making them sound so distinct from each other. As someone who does voice acting for fun, being able to distinguish your voice between two different characters is hard enough, especially, and it's more differentiating when they're both of the different gender than you. I know that a lot of in animation, usually younger males are usually played by women. You know, Goku, for example, is voiced by a woman, as most of all of you who've watched Dragon Ball probably know that in the Japanese. So I think her performance is really, really cool and has such a different energy compared to the original Japanese version from DM. And also Kaiba's voice actor too. It doesn't have the same power that his original Japanese actor does, but it kind of fits this version of Kaiba who's a little bit more calmer, not as over the top, you know, more calculating, the chess master, if you will. I think that really fits this version of Kaiba really, really well, and whatnot. So I think that the voice cast is very, very good in both versions, both of the original anime and this, but I think the voice acting's also cool, as well as the music's completely different. Dylan, am I the only one, do you agree with me that Dark Yugi's theme is a banger? That theme is so good. It's like my favorite, one of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh soundtracks ever is the Season 0 Dark Yugi theme. It's so good. I love that piece. It's so nice.
Something that I do actually prefer in Season 0 than in Duel Monsters is how much emphasis they put on the transformation from Yugi to Yami Yugi. Every time it happens, and the music certainly helps, and I'm in agreement that it's an incredible piece of music, which, you know, we'll be playing right now, and I'm sure anybody who's watched the season knows they can hear the piece in their head that we're talking about. It's just that iconic. But I think, like, they put such an emphasis on that transformation where every single time it happened, and it may have been because, like, it happened a lot more in Season 0 when, like, the stakes were a lot more dire, like Yugi was getting beaten up, or, you know, Anzu was in a lot of trouble, or, you know, there was a terrorist attack going on at an amusement park, whereas, like, okay, Yugi's transforming to Yami Yugi to duel Weevil Underwood in the, you know, Duelist Kingdom tournament. Okay, like, the circumstances don't feel as dire and necessary. So I do acknowledge that I think just because of how Season 0 was, there felt like there needed to be more of an emphasis on this almost godlike mythical being coming out of Yugi in order to save us and save the team and completely rescue the situation and turn it in our favors. And I think the only way we would have felt confident as the viewer that that was going to happen is by giving the transformation a proper sequence. And so the music there every time it happens is incredible, but also Yami Yugi is displayed and, like, projected to be this godlike entity that I feel kind of ascended how he was presented in Duel Monsters. Not to say his presentation in Duel Monsters was bad at all, but I just felt like it was so much more like, oh crap, here we go. Like, you knew stuff was going to go down in Season 0 whenever Yami Yugi came out and took over for Yugimoto. And so I do, and of course Yami Yugi was also much more callous and cold and, you know, almost evil, like borderline evil almost, which is kind of weird to say to describe him in Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 versus, you know, how he was, especially towards the end of Duel Monsters. But yeah, the every time Yami Yugi would come out, the sequence, starting with that soundtrack, was always incredible.
Oh, and I also love that, unlike, because there was transformation in, of course, Duel Monsters. They made a big formal sequence of it in Duelist Kingdom in particular. But Season 0, as far as I know, they never reused the animation sync. It was always unique for each scenario, which there's nothing wrong, of course, of reusing transformation sequences. I love Sailor Moon. They do it all the time. And of course, they're very well done. But I think there's something really unique that the puzzle always like flashes super bright. It takes over the screen. Sometimes you see his shadow come out. The animators did a really cool job over at Toei. I think really making the show visually really cool. And I'm really sad there isn't really any good upscaling. I mean, there has been some fan upscales, but I mean, like, officially, there's been no re-release of this series as far as I'm aware. I think it did have a DVD release or VHS release, I believe sometime in Japan, but it's just kind of like gone off the radar. And as far as I know, the show isn't even licensed anymore, which is why there hasn't been really any copyright issues relating to it. The show, as I know, as far as hasn't been licensed. I think Toei just didn't relicense it, and Konami just wants to pretend it never existed.
That's exactly it. It feels at this point like it is a totally dead series that nobody wants to like officially acknowledge ever happened. Yeah.
Yeah, which is sad because we were funny of talking about this before the stream. Despite the fact, I would say, of all the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, if you gave me like the choice, hey Rarity, here's the entire Yu-Gi-Oh anime library, pick something to watch, I'd probably pick Season 0 probably last. That's not to say it's bad. I just think that I end up rewatching all the other shows just more often.
It's very different.
Yeah, and if I want to read that this kind of storyline, I'd read the manga more than watching the show. But Season 0 still is fantastic. I don't think there's ever been a bad piece of Yu-Gi-Oh media ever. I think all Yu-Gi-Oh media, at least for the animes, I mean, we've had stuff that's been okay, but there's never been a piece of Yu-Gi-Oh where I'm like, this is like garbage, I wouldn't watch it, you know? That's just me. But Season 0, again, is really good and has, again, those unique qualities to it that I really think helps a lot, especially with cinematography. I think they did a really good job of positioning different things, and the music was really cool. And I think it's overall, despite, again, not being the most accurate adaptation, having things I really, you know, like, again, I could harp on Mokuba, but that's personal bias aside. Like, you know, that's just Rarity being a Mokuba fangirl, you know, have to talk about my boy.
Right.
But I think that it's still a really fun time. And I think it's really cool to see these characters portrayed by different actors go through some different things. I'm always a fan of alternate takes on existing media. I know I've talked about that in our previous episodes, which is why I love the spin-off manga so much for our original anime shows, and of course the original manga, the anime, and everything up to that. So Season 0 is kind of a unique version of that. And I also think that even though there's some interesting color changes, like, honestly, Kaiba with the green hair, is it weird? A little bit, by the way. His hair was never green in the manga, by the way. That wasn't a manga thing. They did that probably because green equals greed, right? It's a symbolic, you know? Mm-hmm. But it, funny enough, kind of works for this version of Kaiba. Because it's very different from the character that we know as I am the CEO of Kaiba Corp, Blue Eyes White Dragon, you know, him. Very different from him as a character. So I think the color change, I think, actually works. So, do you have any particular games or episodes that you really like, Dylan, that really stand out to you? Because my favorite is the one that you talked about with the tiger with Eileen Rao, who was anime only. I really liked her vibe as this I really like playing games and I want people good competition, which is why I'm friends with Kaiba. It kind of like, you know, uses Kaiba's, you know, as a status of being a, you know, really well-known gamer to kind of a cool advantage. And I thought her trying to use a tiger on Teo was very terrifying, as you said. It's slowly opening. And I think the game of Rajinhai is such a cool game to watch, and how they had a practice round. You know, she was being fair about it. Like, oh, you've never played, I'll give you a practice round and then we'll play the real thing. And I think the way that Dark Yugi wins that game is actually really, really cool. Because you can't really, like, cheat in that game, really. It's just how many pieces you have. You literally can't cheat. There's no way unless you were using the same pieces. So I thought that was really cool to show that one. I really like that one. That's one of the anime-only ones. Do you have any other particular ones? Aside from Def T, because, of course, that's probably, like, the most notable one, other than the Bakura stuff as well at the end.
Yeah, well, Death Tea and Bakura, I think a lot of people certainly love. When I think of Season 0, one of the first things that I think of course, outside of Death Tea and you know, what you just had mentioned with Bakura, is certainly the amusement park episode with the Ferris wheel, the terrorist attack. That is one of my favorite games. It might honestly be my favorite game in season 0. Eileen's game is also really fun, and I actually loved her as a character. It's funny because she's probably one of my favorite season 0 characters, not in like the main group, and I think it's hilarious because she is a season 0 exclusive character. So I thought Toei did a really, really good job with her. But going back to the Ferris wheel game, having Yami Yugi figure out what the terrorist was trying to do, and then that like eventually he realized it was the clock, and of course that was the earlier in the episode where Yugi and Anzu just go to the amusement park. Another one of my favorite moments is when Yami Yugi plays the game with the really, really creepy false like prediction guy who ends up the chloroform game, which by the way, and this has been talked about a lot, of all the punishments that some people got, that guy really deserved a much, I think, more sinister punishment for what he was about to implyingly do, which would have been obviously disgusting. But the fact that all he did was basically just fall asleep when the chloroform dropped, I always thought he got off way too easy. But I loved when Yugi was carrying Taya, and Taya, like, finally started to kind of realize that, like, you know, Yugi was there. And I think it was later on in that episode where she realized that, like, Yugi and Atem were the same, or Yugi and Yami Yugi were the same person. And I remember that ended an episode, and I remember I always found that scene so fascinating when she, like, finally made the connection that they were one and the same. And I think that's what eventually led them to go to the amusement park. So like that whole sequence of season 0, I really liked. And another one of my favorites too was Joey with the nurse that he had a crush on. Then Yugi ended up playing the golf game with that really sleazy doctor, and Yugi just putt, and it looked like he missed, and it somehow like went down the laundry chute and was a hole in one. And it's just, he did the most like ridiculous stuff. And that's why watching Yami Yugi in season 0 was such a freaking treat, because he did stuff outside of dueling that you would never see anywhere else, but it still felt so in character for him being the game master that he was. But those are some like sequences that come to mind. But the Ferris wheel amusement park game with the terrorist, especially because of like how, I don't want to say real it felt, but how like serious it felt, was certainly a favorite of mine for sure. Mm-hmm.
Another one that you didn't mention was the final game master, the old man who was Kaiba's mentor, was stuck in the wheelchair like on his last leg.
Yes.
That was a Duel Monsters game, but of course like they were in an amusement park, and Taya I think was like being, she was held I think by a dragon robotic. And I think it was cool that he made a connection with Yugi and almost like kind of like laced his hope that maybe Yugi can help out, Kaiba. And of course, that's a completely different backstory from the manga. Like Kaiba's abuse was not mentioned at all in season 0. At all.
Oh yeah.
As far as we know he was adopted, presumably because of the photo that Mokuba has, but his backstory is like completely different. Of course, the abuse still could have happened, of course, but I think it's a very different, that something happened to Kaiba to make him lose his smile, and I think that older man helping him out. And also, the fact that Kaiba Corp has other gaming companies as, like, a rival, and they kind of, like, had a competition. Because, of course, in the original story, we know that Kaiba Corp used to be a military company, right? But it seems like in Season 0's universe, it was always a gaming company. Because Gozaburo, like, was there. Always, like, that's a really interesting change as well. Like, Kaiba Corp's always been this gaming company. It kind of it's just really unique, but I don't think Kaiba's full backstory about the military thing, I think, isn't revealed until, I think, Battle City, in the finals. I think he talks about it in the manga. I don't remember if it's before that is fully mentioned. So I think that's really interesting for that as well, that there are just these gaming companies like betting each other to play games. I think just what they do with games in the Yu-Gi-Oh! In the Season 0 universe in particular, and how they equate it to just, business deals, character stuff. Yu-Gi-Oh's always done that, to be fair, but it's the variety that Season 0 provides, and along with the early manga as well, that makes it such a fun place to revisit when I do choose to revisit it. I think it's really cool for fans to get to see these different sides of these characters, or the yo-yo stuff.
The yo-yo.
Oh, I love the yo-yo and the Tamagotchi episode, the Tamagotchi one. I mean, those were in the manga, I believe. So
yes,
but those were also really, really cool as well. So I guess.
Well, I will also say, Rarity, something else that I do appreciate about Season 0, like, while it's not the most faithful at times, I do feel like it was, like, Death Tea was done well enough where it's very enjoyable, and I also enjoyed the game with Zork and Bakura, and I do appreciate Season 0 for being the only piece of media that we can watch either of those arcs in. Like, we can't, like, see either of those, like, arcs play out anywhere else, because obviously Studio Gallop started after the Death Tea arc. So I do feel Season 0 definitely has a place in, like, the, you know, chronological order, if you will, while of course there is no canon connection to Duel Monsters. And if you don't believe me, you can just watch the Yugi Kaiba duel at the end of Death Tea with Exodia. That, ladies and gentlemen, is technically the first episode of Duel Monsters. They just do it in a totally different way. But that's the starting point for Duel Monsters, if you will. I do like that there are sequences that we can't view anywhere else because Studio Gallop just chose to start their series where they could have Duel Monsters be the focal point game. And it's nice that we still have this piece of media honoring the origins of Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga does that in a almost perfect way. But it's nice that, you know, if you want to watch a series do it and you'd rather watch something than read something, at least we have this. And I am, you know, grateful for that at the end of the day.
1,000% agree. It's just a really cool piece of kind of lost media.
Yeah.
I think the way I found out about it was through Team Millennium posting a casting call. And I'm like, wait, what is this? Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0? Wait, is this a fan thing? And then I Googled it and I'm like, this is a real thing. And then I watched the whole show and I was like, oh, because I wanted to prepare myself to audition, of course. By the way, I played Miho, by the way, for Season 0 for a while. So I was Miho. If you're curious who I got to play. Yeah. So I was Miho for a while. But yeah, so I think that it's just really cool this piece exists and that there are people like Team Millennium's fan group trying to keep this alive, the Season 0 chronology, and kind of bring it to the forefront for some people who may have not heard about it. And of course, you, Dylan, discussing it, of course. People who just talk about it, I think, is always amazing. And I guess now we can shift to the film, or as I like to call it, it's basically an OVA. It's basically an OVA short film.
Come on, it's 23 minutes.
Yeah.
It's like it's 5 minutes, not including the credits, longer than a standard episode. I mean, to call it a movie, which, you know, I guess it technically is.
It was in theaters.
It was in theaters, so it was a movie. I mean, it's ridiculous, but yes, OVA. I like that term better.
I think it's interesting for the OVA that they changed Kaiba's hair to his Duelist Kingdom design. Right. You know, his whole outfit probably to keeping. I know there's been some official posters that came out during this movie came out of what potentially, if they adapted, Toei adapted the Duelist Kingdom arc, what that art style would have looked like. I think that would be very interesting. As well, just like that, the art style, and seeing the movie, I really love that they hype up Red Eyes as this cool card. I know as a Red Eyes enjoyer, I bet that's like the coolest thing in the world. They actually hyped up Red Eyes as a card for a whole film. But the whole film itself, while it is very well animated, is kind of very basic. The coolest thing about it is the duel at the end between Kaiba and Yami. So, but I don't have much really to say about it other than it's just interesting idea for a film. But it doesn't surprise me they would introduce like this one-off character for the film to probably sit in as an audience surrogate for the little kids. You know, like, oh, buy our trading cards. This is what playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like, and things like that. I don't think that's it's because the movie's mostly for promotion more than anything else. It was a promotional film to kind of promote things because it doesn't have much of a plot. I think of all the Yu-Gi-Oh! If you want to count it with the movies we've talked about, even Pyramid of Light has more story than this film. Like, just as an reason for existing. A reason for existing. At least we had a somewhat coherent plot in Pyramid of Light, despite the fact that, you know, it's wonky, as you're very well familiar with having read the novel version a few months back. of course.
Unfortunately.
So I think that the season 0 movie is really cool. I think the visual of the 3 blue eyes, like on this like kind of like little stand thing, I think with the skull on it, that's a cool image. That is super cool, and I low-key wish we got a card that was based off of that art of like just the 3 blue eyes together, maybe like in Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, like alt art or something. I don't know. I just really like that image, and of course, seeing Exodia, we all love seeing, you know, Exodia.
Yes.
You know, Exodia obliterate's always fun to see. So I think the movies, I mean, because it makes sense, right? The movie's kind of just promoting the season 0, because it's kind of adapting its most iconic moment. You know, it's the Exodia scene, basically, with this little plot to tie it together. I don't even, and obviously we see the Dark Magician as well, which is super awesome, seeing our friend, the Dark Magician, because he doesn't show up in the main show, which is very funny.
Yeah, only time he's summoned, yeah.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, because I think in the early manga, Yugi's ace was more Summon Skull than anything else. It was Summon Skull, which I always love Summon Skull, so that's really cool. That I know in the early manga and in season 0, he kind of shines a little bit. But yeah, the OVA, I don't have as much to say about. I think pretty much everything I could have said, you've already said in your analysis video that you did a few weeks back, which was very well done, by the way, as always. I think you pretty much summed it up pretty well of what I think about the film. It's nice,
yeah.
But I'm calling it a movie. It's just when you break it down, it's not the most deep thing in the world, but it's still a really cool piece of media to have. And I think it's a nice little way to wrap up season 0 as a product of, you know, kind of bringing it together and seeing, like, for example, what the characters might have looked like in a more accurate color palette, like with Kaiba, for example. And, you know, I think that was cool.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement. And for those wondering about the video that Rarity is referring to, I mean, I'll have it linked down below. But basically, I just talked about the Yu-Gi-Oh movie that really nobody talks about. Because when somebody says Yu-Gi-Oh movie, you think Pyramid of Light, or you think Dark Side of Dimensions, or you think Bonds Beyond Time. I don't think there's many people out there that hear Yu-Gi-Oh movie and think, you know, about this Toei movie from 1999, which technically is the first of 4 Yu-Gi-Oh movies that exist. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much to add either. I mean, it's nice to see Red Eyes as the focal point. The duel is very quick. The duel action honestly reminds me a lot of when Yugi and Kaiba duel each other in the first episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, with Kaiba dominating the field with blue eyes until Yugi finds a way to get out of it. It's, I guess, a little cool that in this movie it's not through the power of Exodia like it was at the end of Death T in season 0 and like it was in the first episode of Duel Monsters. But, you know, you watch this movie, and if this is like the last Yu-Gi-Oh movie you watch, which for a lot of people it is because they just don't realize it exists, you kind of get sick of seeing Yugi dueling Kaiba and beating Kaiba.
Yeah.
Like, it happens every single movie. And I guess it's not fair to rip this movie for it because this was the first. It's not like this was the last. But, you know, that matchup just gets... While it's a classic matchup, I still think it's one of the greatest rivalries in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, even with all the great spin-offs we've gotten. Like, it does get a little tired to see, especially when the dueling is as primitive as it is in this movie. So, not much to talk about there. And if you're wondering about the releases, so Season 0 came to an end in October of 98. This movie came out March of 99. We then waited another year, and that is when Studio Gallop started Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters in April of 2000. So this movie came out about a year, a little over a year, before Duel Monsters started. And then, of course, Studio Gallop really made Yu-Gi-Oh! What it was, running all the way through Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. But yeah, I mean, you know, Toei, it would have been interesting. Do you ever think, Rarity, about, like, what the world would have been like for us Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans if Toei continued with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's something I think about a lot. Like, what if, you know, Konami gave them the green light and said, we want you to do the Duelist Kingdom part of the manga, and they would have had to, like, make Pegasus and do that. I mean, how do you think that would have, like, turned out? Because the styling was certainly different.
Oh, the styling, yeah. And also, I love that the season 0 movie was so forgettable. I forgot Exodia wasn't really even in the movie, because my brain just doesn't really remember the movie at all.
Right? No, I know, but who cares?
I mean, I want to admit my mistake before the comments get to me. Just my brain.
I didn't even catch that either. Yeah, I didn't even catch it either. So
I rewatched it before this, and I just couldn't remember. I feel like I was zoning out.
He uses the Meteor Black Dragon combo.
Yeah. See, that's a little bit more cool. But I guess, like, when I think Yugi versus Kaiba, like, I just think of Exodia more than I think of anything else, probably.
Of course.
Besides the Dark Paladin finish in Battle City, that was really cool. But in
Yes.
terms of if Toei did Yu-Gi-Oh, I think it'd be interesting to see would Yu-Gi-Oh have grown, because as we know, Toei Animation does a lot of the most popular anime ever.
Right.
Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, One Piece, of course, the GOAT that is One Piece. I'm not a One Piece fan, but I know it's really, really good. It's too long for me. But I'm curious how they would have done, like, would we have gotten all these spin-offs, or would we just have continued with the Duel Monsters characters? You know, like, that's what I think about, because, like, Sailor Moon didn't really get, they got a manga readaptation. Dragon Ball keeps getting sequels to its own story, as opposed to, like, a spin-off with completely new characters. One Piece is still going, of course. So I wonder if Toei continued of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it saw the success, let's say the card game still happens the way it happens in our timeline, right? I wonder if we would even have the spin-off media. I really wonder, would we even have it, or would we be still following Yu-Gi and Company to this day? Which, I'm sure there are some Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans who love that, of course, you know, people who just mainly like the original, which there's nothing wrong with that, of course. Enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! How you wish to enjoy it. But it's just crazy to me that that's what I think would happen, honestly. That if it was successful enough, they would just keep milking DM, which, as much as Konami loves to milk DM in its product a lot, and they haven't really done that much with the anime. Dark Side of Dimensions, I think, being Takahashi was a part of that project. I don't know if it was his idea, but I think that the fact that they've always tried to do something new and novel with Yu-Gi-Oh! For every series that we have, even the Chronicles that's coming up, is something new and novel for the franchise. I always have appreciated Yu-Gi-Oh! For doing that, for, experimenting, for going for it, trying new things. Because as much as I love Yu-Gi and Co., I don't think my passion for Yu-Gi-Oh! would be the same. Or would we even get the show over here in the West? Or, like, would 4Kids have dubbed it instead of somebody else? Because, most of, we had, I think there was 3 different groups did Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, and One Piece. 4Kids did do One Piece for a while, and then Funimation redid it all. But it's just crazy to think that what would happen. Would Yu-Gi-Oh! Have boomed in the West? Like, what?
Yeah, I don't know if it would have
happened. It's so crazy to think about. But I'm really curious how they would have handled, would have been more accurate. Would there be less censorship than what Gallop did? Would there be the same voice cast? Because I know I mentioned to you before, Megami Gota, who is Yugi and Dark Yugi, she apparently, I think she was supposed to do more of Yugi, I think come back for the original Gallop show, but I think she got busy with Rurouni Kenshin at the time, as I think their female lead. I believe. Don't correct. It's someone in Rurouni Kenshin. I think it's the female lead. So obviously that was a big popular show. The schedules didn't line up. Voice acting schedules can happen for a number of reasons. It's just crazy. But I kind of like the timeline that we have. I think Studio Gallop put a lot into Yu-Gi-Oh! And as we'll probably see through all the other shows we're going to talk about this year, which we're actually on schedule to end this year with Rain. So this will be the year of Gallop for the media discussion with some of the manga as well mixed in for the rest of the year in this monthly segment. I think that Toei's run with Yu-Gi-Oh! As we had it was really cool, but it would be so interesting to see what would happen with them, even just artistically. Because I actually really like the Season 0 art style, but I also do love the art style of the of DM as well. I think just Season 0 has a lot more brighter colors. So I'm curious, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a little bit more muted, despite having... It's funny now, because Sevens and Go Rush are very, very colorful, have this kind of similar, brighter color palette. So I'm curious about all that. But that's what I think. I think that it just would be really interesting, and I'm curious how they would adapt. Would it be more faithful to the manga even? Because they kind of did that with this show, right? Would they make dueling the focus? Or would they just say, like we talked about in the anime video about, Duke Devlin's whole arc, right, was completely changed in the anime. Yeah. We had the game, but his importance in that arc was gone. Would there have been as much filler content? Season 0 did add some filler content, but I think that's honestly just to meet the seasonal length of the time. I think that's mainly why they added some games in. And of course, making Kaiba more recurring threat. Would they even have followed the manga and just made Kaiba again a more recurring character? What would they have done? I have no idea.
But yeah, I don't know. It's such a fascinating what if to think about, and would freaking Miho have joined them for the entirety of the the adventures.
Duelist Kingdom.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's a genuine question. Like, it would have been potentially so different, and I think the Toei style of Yu-Gi-Oh! Worked because of the, like, creepier aspect of all the games. But once, like, the dueling really became the focal point more than the randomness of the games, I don't know if that style would have really, like, appealed as much, to be honest. But I think it appeals now to people because of, like, the nostalgia element and because of the uniqueness. And it's just not what people are used to when you think of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. But I don't know if that would have worked for 3-4 years. But, you know, it's one of those questions that we will never know. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you guys all for watching episode 7 here of the Appreciating Yu-Gi-Oh! Podcast. Please leave all your thoughts on all things Yu-Gi-Oh! Toei down below in the comments, the movie, the episodes we got. You know, and whether you would have liked to see them do Duel Monsters, Duelist Kingdom, I should say, and beyond. I'm interested in your opinions on that. Rarity, huge thank you to you. I'm going to have Rarity's channel linked down below. Rarity, anything you want to quickly promote before we say goodbye?
Thank you. It was a pleasure always to be on this podcast. It's one of my favorite. Look forward to the month as it's coming up. I hope to have the Arc 5 teaser video, project teaser, out at the end of this month or early next month. We are working hard on finishing it. I hope it'll be a really cool thing for you guys. And of course, the Yuri dueling stub is in production. I'm getting some lines in that. Hopefully, I'll start rolling that out by more spring. Of course, these videos take a lot of time to make, but I'm still happy I can come forward with Dylan's channel and talk to you guys, and maybe I'll do some more single content this year. We'll just see. Entering my final year of my PhD is really, really hard, but I'm glad I can still make time for this, and I look forward to you guys talking about next month, because we're moving on. Finally, GX fans, it is your time. We're moving on to Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, baby. Next month, we're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! GX subs, so I hope you guys will stick around for that.
Yeah, very, very excited to get into GX for sure. Rarity, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you all so much for watching. This has been the Appreciating Yu-Gi-Oh! Podcast, Episode 7 on Season 0. For more Appreciating Yu-Gi-Ohs, definitely go to my channel, check out the playlist, and yeah, going to be a lot of fun to do GX next month. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.